You're listening to the Visibly Fit podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Wendie Pett, and every week I'll give you holistic, practical solutions for everyday issues related to nutrition, healing, functional fitness, and behavior modifications. As a naturopath, fitness expert, and wellness coach for over 20 years, my goal is to empower you to reach for greater health and to rise up to your next level of living in mind, body, and spirit. You were created with greatness in mind. It's time to own it. Are you with me? Then let's dive in. Hey there, and welcome to the Visibly Fit podcast. I'm your host, Wendie Pett. Well, you're going to want to probably sit up nice, straight, and tall for this episode. At least that's how I felt. As my guest today is an awesome chiropractor, and I thought, oh my goodness, how's my posture? How's my head? Anyway, I know he wasn't observing, but it made me want to sit up a little bit taller. I am excited to bring on Dr. Jason Sabo. He is a 2002 graduate from Northwestern College of Chiropractic. He graduated as valedictorian and was chosen as the class speaker. He opened his first practice in Roseville, Minnesota, before relocating to Edmonton, Canada in the spring of 2004. He has been in practice for over 20 years and plans to continue serving his community for as long as he is breathing and living on this earth. When not in the office, he enjoys spending time with his family, exercising, and living an active lifestyle while taking time to be in nature and explore the outdoors. As a chiropractic student, Dr. Jason was first introduced to the principles of chiropractic and the concept that life flows from a dio via a Dr. James Sigafus cassette tape. As he listened to the stories that Dr. Sigafus shared, a passion was lit from within to share the chiropractic story, which he does in our interview, and to see millions of lives changed by setting people free of nerve interference through chiropractic adjustments. As a student and during his early years in practice, Dr. Jason found that studying chiropractic techniques, he found it fascinating and strived to master techniques that he found to provide the most specific corrective care possible. Over the past 10 years, he's developed his own unique adjusting technique called TIC, which is Tonal Integrative Correction. It's very unique, that has been proven to be specific, safe, and gentle for all ages. This technique is in conjunction with his sincere demeanor and compassion for serving people. It has helped him grow one of the largest referral-based offices worldwide. I hope you enjoy this show. You're going to love Dr. Sabo and just appreciate his humility and yet all of his knowledge. So enjoy. Well, hello and welcome to the Visibly Fit podcast, Dr. Jason Sabo. It's so good to have you here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for getting up early as we're recording this. I know it's a little bit early in Canada, so what a blessing. You know, we were originally introduced via, Zoom by a patient of mine who's turned into just a sister in Christ and who is now on my Visibly Fit team. And she's actually a patient of yours as well. And it just turns out she's like, you've got to meet my chiropractor. He's amazing. And you are, and you're so humble and so amazing at what you do. And we have some, some people that we know in the circle of chiropractic, people that you've gone to school with that I also know as well. And I'm like, what a small world all the way up in Canada, but I'm kind of your neighbor since I'm in Minnesota, but you went to school here in Minnesota, right?
I did indeed. So I lived there for 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So you love the cold, basically, is what you're saying, going from Minnesota to Canada and staying there.
I said living in Minnesota was like an extension of Canada. And so we always said it would be an easier transition if we decided to come back. So
right.
It didn't feel that hard. Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, I really wanted to have you on today because you have a unique technique that I thought we could just talk about, because actually I first want to talk about just chiropractic in general, because some people are a little skittish. They don't really know about chiropractic, or, they've heard that, I'm not even going to say it, but there's that term that people use used to use when people heard about chiropractic? It's obviously more common now that people see chiropractors, but what would you say to somebody about what is chiropractic, and why would it be beneficial in their life?
Yeah. Obviously, that's something that we run into every day. But there's a lot of different schools of thought in the chiropractic world. And so in my industry, really, if you go back to the foundations of it were really overall health healing and really about the brain allowing life to flow down through the body. And so the very first chiropractic adjustment was actually given in 1895 to a gentleman's janitor who actually was stooped over in a closet lifting something heavy and felt like a pop, and he lost his hearing. And so this gentleman, D.D. Palmer, was actually in conversation with this gentleman and heard the story and just kind of reasoned that he's like, well, the pop must have had something go out in your back. And through the course of time, actually had never done it before, but he talked this janitor into allowing him to reposition this vertebrae in his back. And as he felt it, he could feel a bone out of position in his neck. And he adjusted, or in the terms of the initial chiropractor, he re-racked this bone. And the gentleman's hearing was actually restored years after this accident. And so initially, it was actually given to restore this man's health in terms of hearing.
Interesting.
And so it's through the 80s, it's really changed in terms of insurances came on board. And really what they're looking for is we'll say pain, and this in terms of back dysfunction. And what's happened is the modeling of the chiropractic profession in many schools, not all schools, has really gone towards this pain management model, to the point that if you talk to like half of our profession, they're really going to sound like physical therapists in terms of we are trying to improve people's back pain and headaches. But truly, when we look at the neurology of a joint, like the brain obviously runs all the functions of your body. So digestion, your ability to counter stress, your ability to regulate heart rhythms, is all
Hormones.
hormones. Yes, we actually had, for me, I didn't know any of this really going into the chiropractic profession. Um, and somebody in the profession school was like, "Have you ever heard of a James Sigafood?" Like, what is a Sigafood? Like, I don't know what this is. But he gave me this cassette tape to listen to, and I listened to this 12 hours of Sigafoos, and he started sharing stories of people's heart improving and people's hearing coming back. And for me, it was like, I'm going to say it was my God moment where it's like I could hear the Holy Spirit like speak to me and saying, like, this is why I called you to this profession. Like, these are the miracles that you're going to see, that I'm going to work through you, and why I called you to this field. And so early on, it was like one of my first patients. We had a practice member who, it was a couple who struggled with fertility for years. And a very long story short, we just had a conversation about health and what the nervous system does in terms of health. And I was like, have you ever thought of going to a chiropractor? And she's like, chiropractic and fertility? Like, nope, that's way off my radar. And so long story short, we just talked about how the brain regulates these different functions, and neurologically speaking, about 80% of all of the brain's inputs actually come from the joints. And so what's unique about joint dysfunction is when the joints can't move or they're misaligned chronically, it creates this stress loop into the brain. And so, slightly technical term, it changes the type of feedback that the joint feeds from something called mechanoreception to something called nociception. And nociception is really, you can think of it like a stress response from the joint. And a lot of
Like a
kind of
blockage kind of too, right?
literally. Yeah. And so you can think of it as literally just like signaling this chronic stressor to the brain. And so we have this kind of balance. Everybody listening is probably, at least in some way, shape, or form, heard of this fight or flight response. And so when we're under stress, it basically activates all the things that would help us to fight through a life threatening situation or run away from this life threatening situation. And so basically, in a very tight nutshell, it tightens muscles, it worsens sleep, it shoots high amounts of sugars into our bloodstream and blocks the supply of insulin. And so higher heart rate, higher cholesterol levels,
Higher risk of disease.
higher risk of disease. Yes, higher inflammation, actually.
Right.
So what's unique about a lot of nerves are that they adapt. And so it's like when something happens, like if you walk into a smelly, stinky room, for example, walk into a men's locker room.
That's the first thing that came to my mind. Or my son after he used to get done playing sports. Yeah, there you go.
I have a couple of athletes, so we're well adept at this. But when you walk into this smelly locker room, initially your response is, oh, like what is going on in here? Yet if you sit in there for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, your brain kind of gets used to this idea that it's there. So it's not that the smell went away, but your body says, okay, I'm aware that something is not right here. But we've acknowledged that this is not a life-threatening situation. And so we adapt to it, and it's no longer kind of on your radar anymore.
Interesting.
So there's many nerves that kind of adapt like this. But the unique thing is these spinal nerves and the feedback loops from them, they're non-adaptive. And so as long as that dysfunction is there, you'll chronically have this bad feedback loop into the body. And it just literally heightens this stress response, and it shuts down that healing kind of messages that the body's supposed to adapt to. And
Sure.
so unless somebody comes along and can change that, you're basically living in this heightened state of awareness.
Yeah, at
So
the cellular level. And so you're reproducing basically unhealthy cells if you're still in this loop, right? And so, wait, okay, so this is good. I'm curious about, your technique, because every chiropractor I've ever met has their own unique technique,
yeah,
and you have to find what's right for you. But you
yeah,
have something called the Tonal Integrative Correction technique. Tell me a little
correct.
bit about that. And it's very gentle and you know, yeah.
Yeah,
So tell me a little bit about that.
yes. So I mean, one unique thing about kind of the office that I started is, um, I mean, I'm very much on par with, like, if God has put you on earth to do something, okay? And so he's like, he didn't just make you and said, okay, I made you, you have no reason for being here, you have no purpose for being here, and so you can sit in depression and disease and just live off in the corner. I'm like, God created us for purpose. And so it's like, for me, from that very beginning, it's like, okay, like, I know I put you on earth for something, and I created you to make a difference in this world. And one thing that you'll notice is, like, you can't live in purpose by yourself. And so God
Right.
has created us to live in community, to be a light and a
Amen.
salt. And so he's like, okay, I made you different to shine my glory, my presence, and my anointing. And so you can't just sit, like a light under a bushel,
But
or
some
under a
do.
bed.
Some do,
And
Dr. Sabo.
we do. So we
Yeah.
always have that choice where it's like, okay, we have these gifts, callings, talents. And so, obviously, especially in the last 3 years, with kind of the isolation that people have gone through, it's like you see a few different schools of thought where it's like some people hid from it. It's like, I'm going to the forest, I'm going away from the madness, I will live on my own, nobody can bother me. Or it's like, hey, we can choose to be different. Okay.
Mhm.
And so it's like, God says you're salt and you're light. And so salt and light aren't anything by themselves, but they're there to stand out from everything around them. Right.
Right.
And so as I carried that into kind of my work, where it's like, okay, God's created me to lay hands on people, to remove this interference in the body, to see fullness of life expressed in this body. It just kind of naturally, people started coming from far distances to be here. And the unique thing is you get to see, many people, you get to see patterns that develop. Like, for example, it's like with migraine headaches, if you show me one person with a migraine walking into my office, there's environmental factors that kind of influence that. So I'll see, literally within 24 hours, I'll probably see another 30 to 50 people with migraine headaches. Okay.
Wow.
Or there's like little shifts in the environment where it's like, if you see one person with a sleeping problem, I'll see dozens of people who haven't slept very well within that same following nights. And so once you see 50 people or 100 people or 200 people with their sleep not working or migraine headaches or different things like that, you start noticing little patterns in them. Okay, what are the similarities between these people? And it's like, if you see one or two, it's like, well, you can make an argument for things, but if you see 300, 500, 1,000, 10,000 people with the same condition, it's like, okay, what are the little similarities that are related to these people? And so as a response of that, kind of what I did in my chiropractic realm started kind of drifting off. And so what's unique about the TIC method, or the tonal integrative correction, is it's actually all done, the assessment is done in a seated upright position. And so kind of our body's natural greatest stressor that we fight every day is actually gravity. Okay.
Right.
And so we don't really think of gravity as a stressor to our body, but when we look at the shape of the spine, it's fearfully and wonderfully designed, right? So it has this posture that should be able to support itself and hold itself up effortlessly against gravity. Now, as the little deviations to our posture happen, and like, for example, with upper cervical related problems, so problems at the top of the neck, the body has a really unique adaptation to it. So the head weighs approximately 10 pounds, and it should effortlessly just kind of hold itself up there. So there's not a lot of muscular effort going on. Now, as the little bones of the upper neck shift out of position, whether it's sleep related problems, whether it's working
Tech
at
neck.
working at computers and desks all day, or sitting
Uh-huh.
on their phones, um, you'll see the head will actually kind of tilt over to the side a bit. And now the body's no longer able to hold itself upright. And so you'll see some adaptations happen. So one, those little nerves firing from the neck actually influence the part of the brain that regulates our posture. And so you'll actually see one of the shoulders will tip down, the head will tilt over to the side, and then it's really uneven at the hips. So you'll see one hip will actually raise, and so a hip will pop up on one side, and you'll see the shoulder and head tilt over. And so with the advent of people looking at themselves in Zoom, this is something I would always point out to people. And all of a sudden they're on lots of Zoom calls and they're like, I am sitting crooked in front of the camera, But it's never made sense to me that as a chiropractor, we will have people come in who are fighting these gravity patterns all day long. Then we'll lay them down and we'll now assess what the muscular patterns and the kind of spinal stiffness patterns are. So we actually changed it from laying down to the seated upright position so that we can actually really in true life see what the posture patterns are looking like, which muscles are actually changed in response to this body actually trying to hold itself up with this pattern. And
Fascinating.
then basically all the little joints feed into the brain differently. So it's like we can actually assess when one little joint doesn't hold its alignment properly, you'll actually create this network of problems so that you can actually see 8 to 10 different issues arise throughout the body. And so if, for example, this little bone at the top of the neck shifts out and the body tilts over to the side, raises the right hip up, now the body, to try to compensate for that, the right knee will actually start to twist inwards to try to rebalance down through the pelvis. And so as this sits there, we can see knee problems in many people start to develop. Okay.
Yes, and people go after the knee problem rather than the culprit of the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the hip lifts up like 1.5 inches and sometimes up to 3 inches. And now they're walking around with this low back pain. And so in my office, I can't tell you, literally every week we'll have at least a patient coming in who's had like this chronic lower back issue that's going on, and they're having the muscles worked on, and they're having all these exercise given to their lower back, and they walk in and their pelvis is literally like 2.5 inches out of alignment.
Wow.
And they're like, I've been working at this for like 2 years, literally. And you're like, oh, someone missed the little culprit that was actually creating that pattern to begin with. Okay. And so rather than adjusting everything, it's like, okay, let's see which is the actual problem that's created this. Remove that. Oop, there's the posture comes back. And now there's a series of little tests that we do in the seated upright position to say, okay, here's the problem that's causing it. And a series of checks to say, now we can see the muscles balance, the postures come back, the joints are not responsive to what we're doing to it anymore. Now we can stop. Okay. And so less is actually more. Like for most people, we can actually clear their body out within 2 to 3 segments of adjusting them. Okay. And so it's knowing if there's a problem that we can help. And then 2, it's like, when is enough that we know we can actually stop now? And there comes this fine line between us being the doctor and trying to be the healer, as opposed to saying, God put this amazing power in this body that regulates trillions of functions a second. Let's just remove the interference that we can find in it and allow that life to start working for itself.
Let the body catch up,
heal, and make the rest of the changes for us. And so if you just try to force the body or tell the body what to do, you'll get a little bit of the way, but unless that body comes online and can actually start to change and heal for itself, you just recycle the same problems.
Well, I'm so glad to hear about the TIC technique because, most people are used to thinking chiropractic forced adjustment, right?
Yes.
And so you are very gentle in your technique. So great for elderly as well, right? And children and that kind of thing. So there are people that are practicing probably your technique elsewhere. Are you training others to? Yeah.
Yeah, so yes. So to get to the first part, I guess I didn't actually cover it so far, but yes, the amount of force that it takes to move a joint is literally only about 8 to 10 pounds. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so you can actually move the joint literally just with a light pressure, because once you hit the correct joint angle, there's no muscles that can actually resist that force. And so it has to be a very specific move in a very specific direction. And there's no popping, there's no clicking. It's literally just a pressure. And then once you hit the right angle, the joint will actually you can feel it like melt into place. It just,
wow,
kind of just shifts into place. So we take care of many people with like osteoporosis. There's people with rods and screws in their spines, like people in wheelchairs, literally, that we'll just take care of because they don't have to lay down. You can actually just assess them and adjust them in their wheelchairs. And I say people who are scared of being adjusted should just watch a baby be adjusted, because the babies and the toddlers, even like the ADHD kids who are running around like crazy, it's like little 1.5-year-olds, they will sit on the bench, and when it's their turn, they will just be like a church mouse, just
like they love it. Their body loves it.
They are just in like a little baby. It's like you can squirm them, and all of a sudden you just adjust their upper cervicals, and they just melt. They just like right into their mom. So everything from competitive power lifters to infants to people with MS and wheelchairs, to osteoporotic, like there's people literally with active fractures in their backs. And obviously we're not adjusting the fracture site, but the rest of their body that requires it,
They
easily
can help with
adjust.
the healing process. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Powerful. I love what you're doing, Dr. Sabo. I mean, I'm really glad that we connected here because I believe that my audience needs to hear that there is a gentle way as
yeah,
well. If they're looking for a chiropractor and maybe they've been afraid to go to one, you bring a different technique that people might really embrace, right? So, how much would you say I talk a lot about emotions in my practice and how it affects the body. And so can you talk on that a little bit because regarding nerve interference with
mhm,
emotions.
yeah. I am a massive proponent of this, and so I even hate to say the word, but through our COVID experience, like we would, we'll say prior to COVID, the amount of stress that was in the world to post COVID, like amplified probably on this 1,000 percentile. But it used to be. So I've been in this job for 21 years now, and
You look 21. That's
uh,
good.
but if we would see someone like over an inch misaligned at their pelvis, I would consider that like a pretty severe imbalance. And it went through the COVID period to if I saw someone 2 inches out of alignment, that would be a severe imbalance. So everyone always thinks in terms of their spine, um, that physical traumas are the biggest culprit. So it's like you were deadlifting something too heavy, or you fell down a flight of stairs, that they think that's how this happens. But truthfully, the emotional component to it is infinitely worse, and harder to get rid of because people's stress doesn't go away. And so the emotions are linked through that sympathetic nervous system into the muscles and joints. And so when we see people chronically with patterns of stress, they are um, physically, it manifests in our physical being. Okay. So it's honestly probably one of the worst culprits that we see contributing to the problems that I'm finding now. Okay.
Yes.
And so there is like this amazing response to what we do in terms of through the research that's being done around the world. We're seeing that these joint problems actually amplify the stress problems because it like further. So if we have what we call, I always refer to as our stress bucket. So our body's physically capable of dealing with a certain amount of stress. Okay. And so now we have kids running around to sports. You have your own business, you have podcasts going on, you have clients who um, most of the time are happy, but now you've had like 8 clients yelling at you this particular day. You haven't been sleeping well, and it's like the stress bucket kind of overfills. And once it overfills, now we go into this panic mode where it's like logistically, like we're kind of on edge all the time. It's like we're a little jittery, our sleep pattern's not right. You can feel your heart pumping faster. Um, and so what we know is that through chiropractic adjustments, what it does is it lowers that sympathetic tone and starts to reactivate something called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is really the rest and repair center. It actually regulates inflammation in the body. And so as we kind of restore people's alignment, it tones down that extra stress that's kind of happening. And so I always tell people, it's like, I can't deal with the stressors of life going on outside of these four walls for you. But what I can do is I can minimize the stressors that are coming from here and actually take down that extra stress out of that bucket load. Okay. And so we can try to give you tools to deal with the stresses out there, but we're going to help to turn that down and give your body the best fighting chance it can to deal with the stressors of life out there.
That's really cool. Yeah, I really talk a lot to my patients about releasing unhealthy emotions to release unhealthy weight.
Yeah.
But don't you think that, I mean, this is just my thought, that God made us in such a way that, our bodies are always trying to get our attention if it's not in a balanced homeostasis kind of
Yeah.
place. And so when our emotions are out of whack, when things are out of whack, then sometimes, I don't know, this is kind of my thought, that, a fall down the stairs is almost like, not an intentional way, but an intentional kind of way to take action. Like,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm getting your attention because now you have an injury that you can feel physically that can go. And do you find that, or is that just me thinking wackadoodle?
Life where so it was kind of a myriad of things. One, my practice was very, 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 very busy. I didn't have a lot of guidelines in terms of kind of time management outside of my four walls of my office as well. 3 young children, and kind of the icing on the cake was my father actually had a stroke at the time. And anybody who knows me, I consider myself a very optimistic, happy-go-lucky person, and that's just by nature. It's just like always been me. And one night I literally woke up and just heart racing. And I'm like, well, that's weird. It's like maybe it was coffee or something. And long story short, it's I was like, I think this is a panic attack. Like I had no warnings, no precipitating factors, no one specific event that I could point to and be like, oh, that put me over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden it was like, wasn't one night, it was 2 nights, and then 3 nights and 5 nights. And to the point where it's like, literally, I was like,
Debilitating.
do I have to phone like the ambulance? Like is like to that point. And long story short, it's my wife and I sat down and we were like, okay, like something in our life has to change. Okay. And I was like, for me, it was, okay, is it my job? Okay. And I'm like, it's easy to say that it can be stressful at times, but I'm like, I truthfully, from the bottom of my heart, I was like, no, I believe that I'm called to this thing. Like, I know I'm in the right profession. And so it's like, okay, I always look at it. So it's, I'm going to recommend a book if that's all right. But
Sure.
Simon Sinek has a book called The Infinite Game.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a kind of a big deal for me, but it's like looking at things from the short term finite and looking at things from the infinite in terms of like, there's certain things that we have to do throughout our life. And so it's like, okay, I believe that I'm called to my job. And I always say, I'm like, I'll retire, who knows, 85, 90 years old. It's like, maybe then I'll retire. But then it's looking at it from the perspective of, okay, if I'm going to be 85 or 90 years old doing this, like physically, what has to happen in my life that allows me to do that? So exercise has to be a regular part of it.
Yes.
And so it's easy when we're busy to skip those things. And so it's like, okay, I'm just going to be very diligent about my exercise. It goes in my calendar. Bump, 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 bump. If it's in the calendar, it gets done, right?
That's
If
right. That's right.
it doesn't get done.
Mm-hmm.
I very purposely sought out a very specific form of chiropractic care that was like very upper cervical focused. And of course, it's not convenient. It's like on the exact opposite side of town as that I lived in. But I penciled it in, and it's like, this is just a regular part of my week and month and year. And it's like, we looked at, okay, we're blocking out it's like, okay, doing house calls in the nighttime. Okay. It's like, I'm going like nonstop. And at this point I'm adjusting literally hundreds of people a day. And going out sometimes on evenings and weekends and doing that. And it's like, okay, if I'm going to have a family that not only likes me, but still wants me around in their life, we have to actually schedule time as a family, time for rest, time for holidays and vacations. And we actually just penciled those things out in our year. So it's like, we're very specific about what does a healthy work life look like? what does a healthy family look like? And physically, what are the requirements that are going to allow me to exercise and allow me to get proper care for myself? And so it was like, for me, it was like the wake up call in terms of my body is speaking some pretty strong things to me out of the blue. But it's like the wake up in terms of like, we can medicate these things and ignore them and kind of let these unhealthy patterns continue to run, or we can actually like sit down and address like, okay, what are the things that are contributing to these patterns and how can we actually address them like in a healthy way? Okay.
I think this is so awesome that you're sharing about this. This is vulnerability at its best, but it's so common, especially people in the health and health field, if you will, because most of us are wired that we just want to help and we just want to, do whatever God's called us to and gifted us to, and just go, 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 go. And actually the world tells us to, or at least America and Canada tells us to go, 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 and go harder, faster, strong, that kind of thing. When really what you're saying is the way we can become better individuals, glorify God better because we have more time with him, but also serve our patients in a better, optimal way. So I'm grateful that God got your attention because you're doing great things there, and we want you around for a long time, and your family does too. But I'm just so grateful that you, didn't ignore the signs. And I think so many people just ignore it, thinking that, no, I'm expected to do this, grind it, grind it, grind it, when really that's doing a disservice to the company you work for, your calling, your gifting, disservice to our Creator, and also for the life that you have. So thanks for sharing that. That's important. Mm-hmm. Well, as we wrap up this incredible interview, thank you again for taking the time. What would you say, number one, is your favorite scripture verse? That's kind of your life verse. Maybe you have a couple, but maybe one that comes to mind. And how would you close this out as far as if someone is really in a place of feeling like you were, just anxious and not knowing what to do? And what would you tell them to do as their first step?
Okay. So the scripture verse actually probably goes along those lines, where I always tell even my patients, because they're always asking me, like, you always seem so happy. Like, are you like this? You don't have bad days? And I'm like, of course we have struggling moments in our days, but it's perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so number one, it's like, if God has called you, you probably heard the term, if God's called you to it, he'll call you through it. And so scripture verse that I tell them that, honestly, every day I say this, it's like, in my weakness, he is strong. Okay. And so it's like recognizing like, hey, God called this by grace. Okay. And so it's like, if he's called you to this work, it's not because you have these amazing natural talents, giftings, callings. It's because he's looked at your heart and said, you have this willing heart to do it. Okay. It's like throughout the Bible, it's like you can look almost throughout the entire Bible. There's almost nobody that's God is called because they're the
I'm ready.
strong.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's like when David was chosen, he didn't even get invited to the party. Right.
Right.
And it's like Samuel saw the first brother. He's strong. He's handsome. He's tall. He's like, that's the man. And God's like, no, that's not the person. He goes through all the brothers and God's like, he's not here. And he's like, are we missing something? Like, God said we're supposed to be here. He's like, oh yeah, there's our youngest. He's in the field. He didn't even get called. And through that, it's like God said, man looks at the outside, God looks at the heart. Right? It's like God called Moses, and Moses was like, no, you got the wrong person. I can't speak. Right?
He may have stuttered and said that. Yeah, right.
I don't have the natural gifts things to do what you called me to do.
Right.
And so if you're listening today, it's like, you're not called because you're the best. You're not called because you're the smartest. You're not called because you're the best speaker. You're called because God's eyes go to and forth over the world. And he said, the harvest truly is great and the laborers are few. And so he said, many are called, few are chosen. So he's looking for people to say, here I am, and it's not because I'm the best, but because I'm willing. Okay. And so if you can have that heart to say, God can use anybody. And even though I don't have these talents and callings, he's like, if you say yes to God, he's going to use you mightily. Okay. And so if God has called you to this great work, the greatest thing that can hinder you from it is thinking that you have to do it on your own strength. Okay. And so it's like, I can't tell you how many times it's like, I'm naturally not a good speaker. I naturally don't like being around people. I naturally don't like going out there and talking, but I have this strong belief that God has this amazing work that he's doing. And I know that he's willing to change other people's health and life through me saying yes. Okay. And so
Beautiful.
I'm willing to say yes to do it. And if you try to do what God's asked you to do of your own strength, you will fail. You're going to feel stress. You're going to feel burnout. And because you're trying to make it happen. And so if you can just say, God, I don't know how you're going to do this, but I'm willing to walk through it with you. And if we can take one step in that direction, we're going to see amazing things happen. So I'm going to say the greatest thing that you can do on your own is wake up and say, today, God has called me to make a difference in this world. Okay. And it's like we can complain about the things going on in this world, or you can do something in your day to make this world a better place for someone else. Okay.
Yes,
And
and amen.
so it could literally be opening a door for someone, because if you look, it's like there's not a lot of happy faces all the time out there. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just seeing that one person and saying, I see you, here's a door for you. And you matter to me this day. God sees you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And literally that could be the difference in that person saying, I don't want to live anymore, to God actually loves and cares for me. And he made this manifestation of just his love to me through someone just opening a door, letting me in traffic. Okay.
I
Saying,
love it.
hi, I see you today. You look really good. You know?
Yeah, that's really a perfect message, honestly, especially in the way the world is today. Just give a smile, open up a door, let someone in traffic, and just kind of just be loving, just be loving and kind, right? It's that easy. So thank you so
Mm.
much for your time and for the calling on your life and for heeding to that call. So God bless you, friend, and thanks for being on Visibly Fit.
Oh,
And
thank you
oh,
so
real
much.
quick,
Yep.
where can people find you? What's your website?
TICchiro.com. And yeah, we've done most of my teaching actually is in the US. So sadly, a lot of it in the eastern part of the US to this point, but TICchiro.com.
Perfect. All right. Those of you listening, go there, ticchiro.com. Thanks again, Dr. Sabo. God bless.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this incredible episode with Dr. Jason Sabo. He is a very special human being, and God does have him right where he wants them, using his gifts and talents to serve the community and to help them within their healing. So it's so cool, and he is helping other doctors become certified, other chiropractors in this TIC technique. So go to ticchiro.com and see if there is a certified doctor in your area. We do not have one in Minnesota yet. So, Dr. Sabo, if you're listening, let's get some here in Minnesota. But we do, he does have doctors in, Arizona, California, Florida, New Jersey, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Utah, Washington, and even in Mexico. So go and check and see if there's a doctor there for you. And of course, Dr. Sabo is in Canada. So if you are there, go and give him a visit. So thank you again for tuning into this episode of Visibly Fit. I hope that you found it encouraging. I hope that maybe you learned something new. And if you are listening for the first time, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind sharing this episode with someone you care about and writing a a review and giving it a 5-star if you enjoyed it. Really, really appreciate that. And if you are someone that is looking for a program, I'm going to say this because this is my passion, Visibly Fit, right? If you are someone that is looking for a lifestyle change, a holistic approach to your health and your healing in all areas of your life, not just your physical weight, that kind of thing, but also mindset, emotions, your spiritual health, all of it combined, then go to getvisiblyfit.com or go to wendiepett.com and let's work together. Now is your time. This is the new year, right? If you're listening to this live when this is dropped, this is January. Like, let's change the way we do things and get you onto a healthy trajectory. All right. God bless. If you have questions or if you just want to reach out to me, I'm active on social media as well. So look forward to connecting there. God bless, and we'll catch you next time.
Well, that's a wrap for today's show, so thank you so much for tuning in. I love spending this time with you. To learn more and get more free resources, just head on over to wendiepett.com, and thank you in advance for sharing this episode and this podcast, following and subscribing not only to this podcast, but finding me on social media, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are, I'm probably there too. Until next week and our next podcast time together, make it a Visibly Fit day.